Hello everyone, I'm Jenny Maltabano.
And I'm Jared Stepman.
And you're watching MediaMisses. Yesterday, President Trump announced that the U.S. economy is growing at its fastest rate in 4 years.
By increasing growth to 3% over the next 10 years, that would mean 12 million new American jobs and $10 trillion of new American wealth, at least.
This is incredible economic news for the country, for President Trump, for his administration. It's just another huge success they're having, not just in economic policies, but across the board.
Yeah, and we've had so much good news and economic data over really the last year. And this just comes after President Trump secured a deal finally with the EU on trade. So a lot of big things are happening. 4% GDP growth is a big deal, and I think Americans are happy. I mean, this is a time when our country is growing and becoming processed. This is what America is all about, production.
And it's something that all Americans should celebrate.
Now, if you would have listened to the media about a year ago, you would have never thought that 4% GDP growth was even possible.
I feel like the bottom has to fall out at some point. And by the way, I'm hoping for it because I think one way you get rid of Trump is a crashing economy. Yeah. So please bring on the recession.
So the plan I have, I think, will actually produce greater opportunities. The plan he has will cost us jobs and possibly lead to another great recession.
Donald J. Trump is now president of the United States. President Obama is the ex-president.
The scene here is so different than it was a few hours ago when people were happy and relaxed. I have been looking around the room at people who are stone-faced. Some of them have been crying.
Well, let's go back to election night. Remember, everyone was foaming at the mouth, freaking out, saying it's doomsday, the economy is going to tank, we're going into recessions. Now, the doomsday predictions have stuck about everything that President Trump touches, but this is not a surprise.
Yeah, I mean, we saw things from like Paul Krugman saying, well, the stock market's going to go in the tank. I know there was a piece in the Los Angeles Times saying that essentially 3% GDP growth was something of a bygone era, that all we can expect in America now is 2% or something even lower. And I think, these predictions were wildly off. I mean, I know Americans, I know our country's history. I'm not an economist, but I think that hopeful optimism that we'll start growing again, that President Trump really brought back in his campaign, I think that kind of optimism has carried over to the American people. And now, I mean, it's hard to argue with the numbers. The economy is doing great right now, and that helps us across the board. It helps Americans, it helps us in foreign policy, it helps us with our friends and allies. This is a big deal.
It is. The media said the economy couldn't grow to 4%, but that's not all they missed this week. Meghan McCain shut down the left's arguments on socialism on ABC's The View, but not without major backlash.
Problem with socialism, in the words of Margaret Thatcher, at a certain point you run out of spending other people's money. Venezuela, one of the richest countries in the world in the 70s. Now, the average Venezuelan has lost 24 pounds because they're starving to death. 90% of the country is living in poverty.
I think she's talking more about Scandinavia than Venezuela.
I'm sorry. This is what I need from her. Name one country that socialism has ever worked, and also every democratic socialist who is going on TV saying that it's good needs to start paying 90% in taxes.
Iceland.
On your tax form. No, on your tax form, I think you should start paying the amount of taxes that every socialist in this country thinks you need to. Because if you think the government is so good at spending money, look at the VA. No, because it is dangerous.
I just told you several.
Yeah, I mean, this was, I think, the media was overreacting to Meghan McCain's comments. They said, oh, she did poorly. She was outraged beyond control. And I think that's actually completely wrong. I think there's a reason to get worked up about what socialism is actually causing this world, especially in a time when there's so much misinformation. People think that socialism is some wonderful thing, something like a Swedish utopia. Well, that's just incorrect. It's led to terrible things. We've seen what's happened, for instance, in Venezuela right now, where we've had 1,000,000% inflation in that country. That's the end stage of socialism, and it's a bad thing. Meghan was right.
She absolutely was.
Attorney General Jeff Sessions stirred up the media this week. Many say he joined in on a chant of "lock her up" at the Turning Point conference. Here's what he actually said.
I like this bunch, I gotta tell you. You're not gonna be backing down. Go get them, go get them. Rather than molding, lock her up. Well, so I heard that a long time over the last campaign.
Now, Jenny, you were actually at this conference. Can you tell us what happened there?
Yeah, so this was Turning Point USA's High School Leadership Summit. They had a stacked lineup. I was there with the Daily Signal covering it, and I was actually in the audience when Jeff Sessions made these remarks. And certainly this group of very passionate high schoolers started a lock her up chant. Pretty much all of them got involved. Jeff Sessions paused his remarks, was sort of bemused at the passion in the room. He might have said lock her up once or twice, but in no way did he chant along or make a big deal out of it. In fact, he moved along with his speech and, to my knowledge and from what I saw, really connected to the crowd. The media went into a tailspin when CNN White House correspondent Kaitlan Collins was barred from attending a White House event.
To give you a sense of the questions that the White House did not like that we posed to President Trump, here they are.
Did Michael Cohen betray you, Mr. President?
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody.
Mr. President, did Michael Cohen betray you?
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, everybody.
Mr. President, are you worried about what Michael Cohen is going to say to prosecutors?
Thank you, Caleb. Let's keep going.
Are you worried about what is on the other tapes, Mr. President?
Thank you all. Let's keep going. Thank you, everybody. Thank you very much, everybody.
Why has Vladimir Putin not accepted your invitation?
Keep going. Come on. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, everybody. Let's go. Come on, guys. Thank you very much.
We're done. We're done. Let's go. Why has Vladimir Putin not accepted your invitation, Mr. President?
Thank you very much.
We're done.
Well, I think the White House made some important points here that you can't just yell out questions. At the same time, they should answer questions from the media. I definitely hope in seeing some of these sessions that they would call on more on Daily Signal. White House reporter Fred Lucas, who I think asked a lot of great questions, and I do think a lot of these media sources that are not the New York Times, that are not some of the Washington Post of the world, ask some great questions. So maybe part of the solution to this problem is actually asking questions from media sources that'll ask the important ones instead of just trying to get on TV and trying to make a big scene.
You make some great points there, Jarrett. Now, to close out this week, I wanted to talk about a couple of my favorite speeches from the Turning Point Summit. UN Ambassador Nikki Haley and the Heritage Foundation's president, Kay Coles-James, had some really powerful remarks about not just owning the libs, which is kind of the new thing that everybody's saying, which certainly has its time and its place, as Jarrett and I see on Twitter every day. But there are larger points where let's persuade, let's add to the movement, let's multiply. Let's not just shut down to annihilate and, shove people off. Let's try to add them to the movement and persuade them why our ideas are better.
Yeah, and one thing I saw this week that really disappointed me, there was a CNN article that was essentially trying to make points about President Donald Trump and trying to say that he was a traitor, and said that President Andrew Johnson was a traitor president and a takedown of both Trump and Johnson. I thought this was a really shameful thing to say about the former president. You could say a lot of bad things about President Johnson. He had a problem with alcoholism. He may not have been the greatest president, but he stood strong to the Union during the Civil War. He stood with his state. He stood with Tennessee in the Union. I think he was a man who had flaws, but with anything was a brave, loyal patriot. And for the media to go after President Andrew Johnson is really shameful and deplorable for a guy who can no longer speak for himself. Just deplorable.
And you should follow Jarrett on Twitter because he had a great thread on this topic. Very passionate. Always good to have a Stepman history lesson. Well, you heard it here, the biggest media misses of the week.
We want to hear your thoughts on the new show. Send us your biggest media misses and you might be featured next week.